reached a point with this in the color phase where we are right at the finish line. And the next two steps can be done kind of in one. And I think because I've got a deadline on this painting, I will probably do them at the same time. And that is the Harmonizing Glaze and the final white highlight. So you can do the Harmonizing Glazes in one complete step on its own and let that dry and kind of see where you're at, and then do kind of the final highlight glaze. Or you can kind of do some of the Harmonizing Glaze at the same time you're doing the final white highlight. You can kind of give and take, right? So like in the previous video, it wasn't completely pure either, right? Like I did some highlights, and then I also darkened some of those shadows at the same time as I was working. So you can kind of do a little give and take, especially when you're on a deadline, right? Like I am with this. So whereas sometimes I could take my time and do some of the stuff just in one kind of very clean cut, step-by-step process, you can kind of, as you see, can combine some of these steps and work with it that way. So I think that's what we're gonna do here. And I'm probably even still gonna have a day between what I'm about to do right now and maybe kind of tomorrow evening, have like a finishing touch, sort of like boop, you know, here and there. That's what it sounds like when you put the last white highlight on, boop. And so we'll see where we're at, right? So I think, yeah, you'll see what a Harmonizing Glaze is. When I say Harmonizing Glaze, generally speaking, you pick one, maybe two colors that are more or less shadow colors, but you're using the same, more or less, one or two shadow colors for the whole piece. And what this does is that you know, it's not that I want to homogenize the whole piece. I want to harmonize the whole piece. So I want all of the colors to kind of sing together. I'm not trying to make them the same. I'm trying to have them sing together. And harmonizing in this way, kind of having like a shadow glaze that's going to be a similar color throughout the whole thing, really kind of helps like the disparate parts of the color palettes participate in like one conversation. And so just kind of looking, and like I've been thinking about what it's going to be for this piece, it will probably be some sort of purplish color. I will show you in a moment as I mix it. And so that color is going to kind of go throughout the piece in a variety of different ways. It's going to show up differently on a variety of different colors, right? So even though you're using the same glaze, you're you know, kind of by default getting different colors throughout, right? Because a purple is going to look very different on red, on gray, and on green, you know, throughout, right? Even though you're using the same paint, it's going to be a variety of different colors as you're applying it to the painting. So that's the general idea. So that's what we're going to do. And so we're really kind of in the very home stretch, right? So this, as we started out this series with the idea that you've got, you know, kind of once you've got the base glaze color on, then what, right? And the then what is you do a shadow glaze, a highlight glaze, a harmonizing glaze, and the final white highlight. And, you know, these are very general basic steps. As you can see, you can kind of keep them very separate. You can combine them. There's different ways for doing them in different ways throughout different paintings, kind of as what comes up as you're working and how much time you have to get it done. So without further ado, let's dive in, and I'm excited to finish this painting. Here we go. to start with, I really wanted to just show you how I make my glazes for this harmonizing glaze in the first place. So I have chosen several colors. One is this dioxazine purple. Another is this sepia. I love sepia. It's one of my favorite colors for so many reasons. And then for the third color, I am using some indigo. Got a little bit out onto my palette paper there. And then my fourth color is some good old Payne's gray. So let's squeeze a little bit out on our palette paper there. And there you go. And now I use liquid. And so I have a lid. Like you can just see it. Those are just, jar lids. And I put the liquid in there. And of course, liquid is kind of a funny consistency. And it just when it dries, it just becomes this kind of hard glob. So I'll just keep putting new fresh liquid on top of the old liquid that's dry until there's literally no more room in my jar lid. And I get a new jar lid. They last a long time, and the old liquid and the new liquid don't mix at all. And then on the left, in the upper left, that is my terpenoid. I use the natural terpenoid that is actually even water. You can kind of wash it with water. It's water soluble to some degree. And it is very non-stinky. So those are my mediums. You saw how I just kind of mixed it together there. You just want a really light glaze. You want enough pigment so that you can actually see it, as you can kind of see what I'm doing right now. You can see it. Well, it's funny, right? It's like you can see it and you can almost not see it. Like you can tell that I'm doing something, but it isn't so much that it's, blotting out what's already there. You're just kind of adding, it is a glaze in the most traditional way. You're glazing on top of what's already there, a color that you want added over those colors to kind of bring it all together into one, as the word is, harmony, right? Just like when you sing with a bunch of people, you harmonize, right? Because that sounds nice. And so that's one way of doing it. You kind of do that all over the whole painting, basically. So I really, you focus on the shadows, of course, because that's kind of where this color really lends itself to being. But, I'm both putting it on her leg and on the ground, right? So exactly like I was putting it on the tree and on the leaves. I was putting it on her arm and on the bark and on the flowers, right? And so you kind of, the colors want to play nicely together, and they don't necessarily even have, nothing in nature really has kind of like a hard edge. And so doing this kind of over your painting, like when you're at this stage, makes those edges much more realistic and, just much more pleasing to the eye to look at, honestly. And, you're bringing something that is kind of inherent in nature into your painting that is it's subtle, but the difference that it makes is huge. I mean, subtle in the fact that like it's a subtle technique. You're not going in with, horns blaring and a marching band. It's like you're kind of going in with like a whisper. And it really, but the effect is so big because the difference from having it on there and not having it on there, or rather from, after you put it on there from when you didn't have it on there is very noticeable. And you'll see, it's like, it's one of those funny things. It's like you can see it when I'm doing it. And then almost, when I'm done working on a particular area, it's almost like I didn't do anything at all, because it's like, oh, it was like that the whole time, But so it has that kind of very funny, subtle, kind of spooky sort of way of, reacting to the painting that's there. So here I'm working on the crown. And, you know, I am, because it's such a, it's a, again, it's just enough of a glaze that you can see the color, but it's not so much of a glaze that I have to really worry about like you know, getting it into like the specific shapes, right? So I'm just kind of glazing the entirety of a part. And here I'm just glazing the entirety of, you know, where I need it, and kind of blending those edges together as I'm working. And the nice thing is too, right? It's like I can, because I'm mixing it, you know, as I'm mixing it. It's not like I pre-mixed anything. Those paints are just on my palette. I mix it, you know, a little bit at a time, as you saw. And so I'm not doing a huge amount each time. So I can vary the amount the amount of pigment I'm using in that glaze each time. Okay, so here I'm working on her eye, Vinayaki's eye. And so, you know, like I'm using the Payne's Gray to really just kind of give her some eyelashes and make her have some really, you know, pretty eye makeup. subtle elephant eye makeup. And elephants have the most lovely eyelashes, if you've ever noticed. You know, like a lot of animals do. They're like, wow, you know, what a set of eyelashes. So I'm just kind of giving her eyes that a little bit of glitter and a little bit of highlights even, you know. I'm not even doing highlights yet, but it's good to, you know, like these are guidelines, right? And you just kind of do what you need to do as you're doing it while you're doing it. And so just kind of doing little bits of subtle detail work while I'm in this stage too, right? Because I'm very close to being finished. And so this is the time where if I notice that something needs a bit of attention, I'm going to give it to it. Like no matter what. It's not like I'm going to just, you know, like, oh, I can't do that yet because it's not the right time to do it. So that's silly. So, you know, a little bit of detailing here and there on the feet, on the beak, on the face. And you can do, you know, you can use that Harmonizing Glaze color to do some of those details even, right? If you need some shadow, like you need, how do I say this? You need some detailing in the shadow regions of your subject matter, then that is a perfect color. So again, like I vary the amount of pigment in my glaze depending on what I need. And that's kind of the beauty of like mixing it as I go, little bits at a time, because then I can really customize the amount of depth I want in that color. So you can see here that I'm actually using quite a bit more pigment here because this region really needed it. It needed a bit more depth than, you know, the bottom part that I was working on, because it's, you know, it's just farther away, and it's, you know, you have to play with that give and take with how your eye picks up like what you want. So I wanted the birds to kind of jump out a bit more. I wanted to knock the trees back a bit more, or rather the leaves. And here we go. It's highlight time. So you can see now I've done the Harmonizing Glaze over everything. I didn't, you know, I didn't show you what I did it on everything, but it has been on everything. All the flowers, all the bark, everything, you know. And so here I am doing all of the details in white. And so this is that kind of beautiful moment where, you know, I'm not glazing in white anymore. I am just painting in white, you know. And so it is pretty much an opaque white that you want in this kind of highlight scenario where I'm doing the jewels. Like that is an opaque dot of white, or a little bit of, you know, finessing there. And, you know, what I did earlier on her forehead, you know, I just did the same technique, but I'm using a much more opaque amount of white rather than a glaze white. It's pretty thick white. Then I'm kind of fuzzing out with my fuzzy brush. I have an entire video on like fuzzy brush and detail brush that I can point you to in my channel. So I'm really just I want to be aware of where my light source is now more than ever, right? This is where, the proof is in the pudding in a way, right? Like all that work from the beginning of highlights, all of that beautiful underpainting that you did with all the white, right? This is kind of the last, little drop of frosting on an already beautiful layered wedding cake. And so it matters that all of that work beneath it this is kind of the chef's kiss on top, the cherry on top, if you will. And you are really just putting, that top bit of highlight onto all of the highlights you've been working on this whole time, because, this painting is built in highlights. And so this is kind of its beautiful final moment to shine as radiantly as we can get it. Does it always have to be white? No. If you are painting, yes and no. Let me say that. If you were painting, I have a painting that I did that is moonlight. And the highlights, the highlights in this stage of highlighting are a very, very pale blue white. So it is white, but it is a blue white. And so stuff like that, you can do that, but it really depends on your lighting. It depends on, your consistency in the painting of that lighting. You don't want to just, if, you didn't plan to do that from the beginning, and you haven't made the adjustments in your color and glazing to this point, I wouldn't just go in with I'm just going to make it like, a pink white. You'd have to change some things. And not that you couldn't do that. Of course you could, but you don't just make the one decision without thinking of the entirety of the piece as a whole. So I would, if you want to play with like the brightest of bright highlights in a specific color, then that's something I would consider as I'm thinking about the painting from the very beginning, or at least, of course, from the time you really do the color and the glazes, because how you do those glazes and the colors you use for those glazes is going to make a difference to that lighting, to make it look like you meant to do it. It wasn't just an afterthought. Okay. So little details with hands. So I'm using a very small brush. I love my tiny brushes. And I'm still using a fuzzy brush when I need it, right? So, but it's not a super fuzzy brush. It's really just one of my filbert brushes, but I'm using it as I'm using a fuzzy brush. So I'm using both the really, tiny, I think that's, it might be just a 0. I think that's a 0. Because, the details are, you can use any, 000 brushes I love for this kind of work. This one didn't need something so small. I could get away with just a 0, but often I do use the 000. Okay. Here we go. So after sitting with it for a little while, like a day, I was like, it's not done. I needed to kind of create another harmonizing glaze. So I added in the purple, the Payne's gray, and then that cobalt turquoise. And so here I am. I'm going to point out exactly what I did. You can kind of see there's a blue tint to it. And I really decided that the purple was good, but it needed something else. And the shadows needed a bit of that blue. And, you know, sometimes these things just kind of come to you in the middle of the night, you know, when you're trying to sleep or you know, in the shower or something. And that's kind of what happened. I was like, it's not done. It's not done. It's not done. And so I added in that extra kind of harmonizing. And you can see that I went through and did the highlights everywhere. And, you know, on all of the leaves, you know, in all of their varying degrees and depths of intensity, right? You know, all the jewels, all the flowers, you know, all the petals, you know, and the birds, everything. So there she is. So glad you joined me for this process, and I hope these videos have helped you kind of understand the color glazing process a lot more clearly. You know, it's a never-ending well of information, but this is at least a pretty good basis on how to do this, and I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much.